Hey guys, tonight we're going deep into your bedsheets. Literally. Imagine you're lying there in the dark, eyes open, brain racing, lit faintly by the glow of your phone. Maybe you're tired. Maybe you're just tired of being tired. Now, imagine this: a caveman, half naked, snoring peacefully under the stars, surrounded by the warmth of a fire and his tribe. Who's really living the good life? This is a story not about sleep, but about your relationship with it. And spoiler alert, you probably won't survive this with your dignity intact. Because sleep has seen some things. From ancient rituals and royal quirks to modern tech-induced insomnia, sleep has always been weird. And the more we learn about it, the more we realize how far we've strayed from what nature intended. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're at it, drop your location and the local time in the comments below, just so we know who's battling bedtime across the world right now. Let's start with you. Yes, you. The modern sleeper. Insomniac by choice. Scroller of doom. You probably think you know how to sleep. After all, you've been doing it since birth, right? But here's a truth bomb. Your body is built to sleep, but your world is designed to stop you. Sleep isn't just rest. It's a full-body, high-tech reboot. Your brain cleans itself while you sleep, literally scrubbing out toxins that build up during the day. Your memories organize themselves. Your muscles repair. Your immune system levels up. It's not downtime. It's maintenance time. But here's the kicker. Most of us are failing at it. Badly. Studies show over 35% of adults don't get enough sleep, and teens are walking zombies thanks to late-night screens and early school bells. You're more likely to crash a car from drowsiness than from drinking. And if you miss enough sleep, your body treats it like an infection. So how did we get here? Let's backtrack. Imagine you're in a cave, thousands of years ago. There's no Netflix, no neon lights, and no FOMO. When the sun sets, everything goes dark, except for the flicker of a fire and maybe the moon. Your body, not your clock, tells you when it's time to sleep. Melatonin floods your brain naturally as the light fades. You yawn, curl up with some animal skin, and drift off while listening to wolves howl in the distance. Simple, right? Now, contrast that with today. You're indoors under LED lights, probably watching something loud and exciting right before bed. Your circadian rhythm, the internal clock wired into your DNA, is completely confused. Blue light from screens tricks your brain into thinking it's noon. So instead of melatonin, you get cortisol. That's right, stress hormone. At bedtime. We've built an entire society around resisting sleep. Coffee in the morning, energy drink. But sleep isn't optional. Every living creature does it. Fish, birds, even insects. Sharks sleep with one half of their brain at a time. Dolphins too. And ants? They take hundreds of mini naps a day. Your body has sleep built into its design. Your brainwaves slow down, your body temperature drops, your breathing deepens. Everything is fine-tuned for this ancient cycle that humans have followed for hundreds of thousands of years. And yet, here we are, lying in bed, wide awake, scrolling through videos about sleep. Irony alert. But you're not totally to blame. This war on sleep has been going on for centuries. Religion, culture, economics, and power have all tried to shape how we rest. There were times when sleep was sacred. In other times, it was a sign of laziness or weakness. In some cultures, dreams were messages from the gods. In others, they were dangerous illusions. Even today, hustle culture tells you to sleep when you're dead. Well, sleep too little, and that deadline might come early. It gets worse. Lack of sleep doesn't just make you cranky. It messes with your memory, your metabolism, even your DNA. Chronic sleep deprivation is linked to heart disease, diabetes, depression, and a shorter lifespan. You can't out-caffeinate biology. And sleep isn't just about quantity, it's about quality. Ever wake up after 10 hours and still feel exhausted? That's because your sleep cycles were disrupted. Ideally, you go through 4 to 5 cycles a night, each lasting about 90 minutes. You move from light sleep to deep sleep to REM, the dreaming stage. Interrupt that rhythm, and your brain feels like it was run over by a bus. So what can you do? First, dim the lights an hour before bed. Your brain needs darkness to cue melatonin. Second, put the phone down. Yes, even this video. Blue light equals brain confusion. Third, be consistent. Go to bed and wake up at the same time, even on weekends. Your brain loves patterns. Still, it's not easy. Maybe you're a student with a pile of exams, or a parent with a crying baby, or someone working night shifts. Modern life isn't sleep-friendly. But knowledge is power. The more you understand how sleep works, and how it once was, the better chance you have of reclaiming it. And here's where our journey truly begins. Because to understand how we sleep now, you have to understand how humans used to sleep. And trust me, it's weirder, wilder, and far more fascinating than you think. From Egyptian tombs to medieval night gossip, from Roman siestas to royal bedroom rituals, we're about to take the most horizontal journey through history ever told. Ready to drift back in time? Let's rewind far before alarm clocks, memory foam, or late-night delivery apps. We're going prehistoric. Yes, caveman style. Imagine a time with no streetlights, no glowing phones, no 3 a.m. doom scrolling. Just you, your tribe, a crackling fire, and the endless night sky. Prehistoric sleep was simple, but smart. It had to be. Survival depended on it. Anthropologists believe that early humans slept in segmented shifts, not everyone at once. In a group of 10, a few would rest while others kept watch, then they'd rotate. That way, someone was always alert for rustling grass, snapping twigs, or the unmistakable snarl of a predator. This watch system wasn't just effective, it actually optimized safety and community bonding. You'd wake to stories from the night watchers, warnings about noises, and even gossip. That's right, even before language was fully formed, nighttime chatter was a thing. But don't picture this as one long 8-hour slumber. Research into modern hunter-gatherer tribes like the Hadza in Tanzania suggests humans naturally follow fragmented sleep cycles, napping, dozing, and waking multiple times through the night. And yet they report waking up refreshed, with more energy than the average caffeine-fueled office worker. Why? Because their circadian rhythms are perfectly synced with the natural world. The sun dictated everything. At sunset, light faded, temperatures dropped, and the body naturally entered rest mode. There were no bright lights extending the day, no artificial pressure to stay productive at midnight, and no buzzing phones to rip you from a dream. Here's another twist. Fire changed sleep forever. Once humans learned to control fire, they suddenly had light and warmth during the dark hours. Fire served as both a comfort and a barrier, keeping wild animals at bay and allowing some members of the group to stay up later without risking a predator surprise. Sitting around the fire led to stories, songs, and even early forms of ceremony. Sleep and social life became deeply intertwined. But what did they sleep on? Not memory foam, obviously. Most evidence points to piles of grass, leaves, or animal skins, sometimes even elevated platforms or shallow pits for warmth. Recent discoveries in South Africa found 200,000-year-old grass bedding, yes, prehistoric mattresses, layered with ash to repel bugs. Honestly, not a bad idea. And posture? Early humans likely slept in groups, side by side or in a huddle. This meant shared body heat, a natural sense of protection, and constant connection. Compare that to the modern trend of individual beds, separated rooms, and earplugs to block out even your partner's breathing. We've gained privacy, but lost something primal, the reassurance of community during the most vulnerable hours of the day. Sleep in prehistory wasn't just functional, it was resilient. Modern studies show that tribal people fall asleep when they're tired, wake naturally with the light, and nap during the day if needed. Why? Because their sleep is unbroken, aligned with nature, and socially supported. Interestingly, they don't even stress about not sleeping. There's no pressure to perform sleep, no guilt for waking in the night. They just accept it as part of the rhythm. That anxiety you feel at 2 a.m. when you're still awake? Totally a modern invention. Let's also talk dreams. We often think of dreams as random, but early humans believed dreams were messages from ancestors, spirits, or the natural world. Dreams gave guidance, warnings, even decisions. Entire tribal rituals might be shaped by a dream someone had the night before. In that sense, sleep wasn't downtime. It was sacred insight. Fast forward to your nightly routine. Anxiety scrolling, blue light, stressing about how many hours you have left before your alarm screams. Doesn't exactly feel sacred, does it? And here's the final blow. Early humans were active during the daylight hours, outdoors, moving constantly. This natural physical exhaustion led to deeper, more restorative sleep. Your ancestors didn't need sleep aids. They had spears, long treks, and sheer survival driving their cycles. You've got office chairs, Uber Eats, and Netflix. Not exactly circadian fuel. But the real tragedy is this. In trying to conquer the night, by lighting it up, extending productivity, and cramming 25 hours into a 24-hour day, we've lost the natural partnership with the dark. Where once it signaled peace, now it sparks panic. Where once the stars told stories, now the glow of your phone tells you someone liked your meme. Yet somewhere deep inside you, the old rhythms remain. The way you get sleepy as the sun goes down. The craving to nap after a heavy lunch. The weird comfort you feel in the crackle of a campfire. It's not nostalgia, it's biology. Echoing from a past where sleep was communal, instinctive, and, yes, better. And if you think that's strange, wait till we reach Egypt. Because in their world, sleep was a portal to death. Dreams were divine dispatches, and pyramids weren't just tombs. They were monuments to the eternal nap. You're walking through a corridor of sand and silence. The heat hums in the air. Ahead, a towering stone pyramid rises, impossibly perfect, almost defying logic. Inside, it's cool, dark, and still. A stone sarcophagus rests at the heart of the structure, filled with treasures and inscriptions. You're not in a bedroom, but somehow, you're standing inside the ancient Egyptian version of one. Because to the Egyptians, death was sleep, and the afterlife was the ultimate dream. It sounds dramatic, but ancient Egyptians took their sleeping arrangements seriously, not just in life, but in eternity. The concept of rest wasn't just physical, it was cosmic. They believed that sleep and death were siblings, both ruled by gods, both transitions to other realms. So, when someone died, especially someone important, they didn't just— Let's start with their actual sleep habits. You'd expect kings and queens to have luxurious beds, right? Well, kind of. Egyptians did have beds, but they weren't the soft, plush kind you're used to. Think wooden frames elevated off the ground with woven leather or rope, sometimes adorned with gold and ivory if you were rich. But the most surprising part? Their pillows. These weren't fluffy clouds, but curved headrests, often carved from stone or wood, designed to cradle the neck. Why? 2 reasons. 1, it helped keep their elaborate hairstyles and wigs intact. 2, it elevated the head, keeping insects away from the face. Comfort? Questionable. Practical? Absolutely. But the bedroom was just one part of the story. What happened after death was far more important. Egyptians believed in a complex afterlife, where the soul had to pass trials and journey through the duat, a shadowy underworld filled with gods, monsters, and rivers. To survive this epic journey, you needed supplies: food, water, tools, amulets, even your favorite furniture. That's why tombs were so elaborately packed. Now ask yourself, why build a massive pyramid visible from miles away just to house a dead body? Because to Egyptians, the pyramid wasn't just a grave, it was a launchpad for the soul. A permanent symbol of power and peace, a beacon that connected the sleeping pharaoh to the sky gods, particularly Ra, the sun god. As the sun rose and set, it mirrored the soul's journey, dying, resting, and rising again. In fact, pharaohs often began building their pyramids as soon as they took the throne. Why? Because preparing for the eternal sleep was the most important task of all. Imagine if your entire life was structured around building your ultimate bedroom. That's how serious they were about it. Let's dig a little deeper. The god of sleep, Seshat, and the god of dreams, Bes, played essential roles in the daily and spiritual lives of Egyptians. Dream interpretation was no fringe belief, it was mainstream. Priests kept dream manuals, listing common dreams and their meanings. Dreaming of being bitten by a snake? That's bad. Dreaming of sailing on a river? That's good. They believed dreams were messages from the gods or even the deceased, meaning your dream life was something to watch closely, not just laugh off at breakfast. And sleep wasn't only symbolic, it had healing power. Ancient Egyptian doctors prescribed sleep as a treatment. You could visit a sleep temple, yes, that was a thing, where you'd undergo rituals, chant spells, and lie down to wait for a healing dream. The god Imhotep, who eventually became associated with medicine, was believed to appear in these dreams, offering cures or divine advice. It's all a bit surreal, right? Sleep was medicine, prophecy, preparation for the afterlife, and a daily ritual. It wasn't boring, it was loaded with meaning. Even the poorest Egyptian had some idea of how they'd be laid to rest, how their forever sleep would be handled. From mummification techniques that preserve the body for millennia, to inscriptions on tomb walls that read like bedtime instructions, the obsession with rest ran deep. And here's where it gets even more interesting. Modern sleep science owes some weird debt to Egyptian ideas. The idea that sleep is cyclical, with active stages like dreaming, mirrors their concept of nightly soul journeys. They thought part of your soul, called the Ba, left your body during sleep, traveled the world, and then returned at dawn. Sound familiar? That's not far off from how your brain behaves during REM sleep. High activity, wild imagery, emotional processing. Of course, there's no scientific proof that your soul flutters around while you sleep, but the poetry of it all, that endures. In a way, the Egyptians were grappling with the same mystery we are. Where do we go when we fall asleep? And why do dreams feel so real? Back to those pyramids, built with astonishing precision, aligned with stars, containing chambers no one's entered for thousands of years. Why so much effort? Because for the Egyptians, rest was sacred, not just a daily necessity, but a spiritual event worth eternal architecture. Let's compare that to your average mattress in a box. You unroll it, flop down, and pray for 6 hours of uninterrupted unconsciousness. Not exactly pyramid material. So what can you take from the Egyptians? Maybe it's time to rethink sleep as more than just a biological recharge. Maybe it's a ritual, a form of self-care, even a conversation with your subconscious. Maybe your dreams have meaning. Maybe your rest deserves reverence. Because if you keep treating sleep like something to squeeze in between deadlines and digital distractions, you're missing the point, and quite possibly, the gateway to your own pyramid of peace. And speaking of rest as ritual, let's hop forward to Rome, where emperors took midday naps, oracles interpreted dreams for the state, and the siesta wasn't just a break, it was political. Close your eyes for a second and picture it. Marble columns glinting in the sun, sandals scraping on cobbled streets, the aroma of fresh bread and olive oil wafting through the air. Welcome to ancient Rome, where conquering empires and debating in togas went hand in hand with something far more relatable, a good old-fashioned nap. The Romans understood that rest wasn't laziness, it was strategy. Especially in a city that baked under the midday sun, the Romans perfected the art of structured daytime sleep, known as the meridiatio. Today we call it the siesta, and it was serious business. You might imagine Julius Caesar charging into battle or arguing in the Senate, but around noon he probably ducked away for a nap. In fact, most of Roman society paused at midday. Shops closed, people went home, and the city slowed to a whisper. The heat made work impossible, yes, but culturally, sleep was considered part of the productivity cycle, not a break from it. And we're not just talking about common folk. Elite Romans, especially politicians and thinkers, guarded their nap time. The great orator Cicero even wrote about it in his essays, highlighting the mental clarity that came after a short, restorative rest. Sleep was a tool, a tactical advantage. Want to think sharper, speak better, make big decisions? Get some sleep first. But there was another side to Roman sleep that was deeply spiritual and strange. Enter the dream interpreters, or coniactores. These weren't your horoscope-reading aunties. These were respected figures whose opinions could influence political decisions. Dreams were taken seriously, especially if they involved gods, omens, or strange animals. One famous case involved Emperor Augustus, who reportedly changed his military strategy after dreaming of victory. Another dream led a general to delay an attack, avoiding what would have been a catastrophic loss. You might say they slept on it, but not as a joke. It was policy. Romans believed dreams were messages from the gods, or even glimpses into the future. In temples, dream incubation rituals were performed. You'd sleep in a sacred space, hoping a god like Asclepius would visit you in a dream and offer healing or guidance. This was especially common among the sick, the grieving, or those seeking divine permission for a major life decision. But what about regular night sleep? That, too, was different from today. Bedrooms were often small, sparse, and not considered private spaces in the way we understand them. Servants, family members, even strangers might be in the same room. Sleeping arrangements were more about practicality than personal boundaries. Bedding ranged from soft, cushioned setups for the wealthy to straw mats for the poor. But one thing everyone had in common: candles and oil lamps, which offered light after sunset but didn't mess with melatonin the way your smartphone does. Roman nights were naturally dark, making it easier for people to drift off. You can almost hear it: the crackle of a lantern, the soft snore of someone sleeping nearby, a gentle breeze through a mosaic-covered window. Interestingly, Romans may have also experienced what we now call segmented sleep. Like medieval people who came later, they often woke for an hour or two during the night, sometimes to pray, read, eat a snack, or even, well, engage in adult activities. This wasn't considered insomnia, it was normal. The concept of sleeping a full 8 hours straight didn't exist yet. It only became standard in the industrial age. Another fun Roman twist: their relationship to sleeping positions. While you might be curling up in a fetal position with your blanket pulled to your chin, elite Romans often slept reclining on their sides, even during meals. That's right, they dined lying down, and often just stayed that way. The line between eating, resting, and sleeping was much blurrier. Full stomach, time to doze. Now let's not pretend everything was serene. Not all Romans slept well. City life came with noise, violence, and stress, especially for slaves or the urban poor. Apartments were stacked in tight insulae, with thin walls, creaky floors, and zero soundproofing. A noisy neighbor with a lyre, a catfight outside? Tough luck. Still, the idea of rest as a right, especially among the elite, remains strong. And then there's the literary side of sleep. Roman poets like Ovid and Virgil often wrote about Somnus, the god of sleep, who dwelled in a dark cave where the sun never shone and poppies bloomed. The cave was silent, foggy, and peaceful, a mythical version of the perfect bedroom. There, dreams would rise from the underworld and float into the minds of sleeping mortals. They even had two personified spirits, Morpheus, who shaped dreams and could appear as humans in them, and Phobator, who brought nightmares. If these names sound familiar, it's because they inspired modern words like morphine and phobia. That's how deep Roman sleep culture runs. It's etched into the very language of our reality. So, what can we learn from the Romans? That sleep isn't a weakness, it's a strategy. That daytime rest can recharge the mind. That dreams might be weird, but meaningful. That you don't need to fear waking up in the night. And that sometimes lying down with a full belly is the most Roman thing you can do. The Romans built aqueducts, roads, empires, but they also built a culture that respected rest. Maybe you should too. And speaking of strange sleep patterns, the Middle Ages are next. When the night was long, the candles were short, and 2 sleeps were the norm. Yes, people literally got up in the middle of the night to hang out. The year is 1348. The air is thick with candle smoke and whispers. A rooster crows in the distance, not to start the day, but to mark the middle of the night. Because here, in the Middle Ages, sleep doesn't come in one long stretch. Instead, your ancestors slumber in 2 distinct chunks, with a curious period of wakefulness right in the middle. Welcome to the world of segmented sleep. It's a concept that sounds bizarre today, but for centuries this was just how nights worked. Let's set the scene. You've just finished your evening meal: stew, coarse bread, maybe a pint of ale, and the sun has disappeared behind thick wooden shutters. There's no electricity, no screen time, just the flicker of tallow candles and the deep creak of wood settling in the dark. Naturally, your body starts winding down shortly after sunset. You head to bed early, around 8 or 9 p.m., and drift off into what's called first sleep. This phase lasts about 4 hours, and it's heavy, deep, restorative. But around midnight or a little after, something surprising happens. You wake up, not startled or anxious, but with a gentle sense of clarity, and you stay up for a while. This wasn't considered insomnia. It was normal, expected, and even cherished. During this time, called the watch or interlude, people would do a variety of things: pray, write, tend to livestock, smoke, make love, or just sit in quiet reflection. Sometimes they visited neighbors. Yes, people actually went out at midnight to chat or share drinks. There are even legal records that mention night visitors knocking on doors, borrowing tools, or checking on friends during this waking window. After an hour or two, the household would settle back in for second sleep, another 4 hours or so of rest before the sun rose. The pattern followed a natural rhythm, aligned with circadian biology and dictated by darkness and candle cost. Why did this happen? Without artificial light stretching the day, people naturally fell into earlier sleep. That early bedtime meant they'd wake after just a few cycles, naturally refreshed, and pass some time before drifting off again. There was no pressure to sleep in one unbroken chunk. The concept of 8 straight hours only emerged centuries later, when clocks, work schedules, and factory shifts began to control time. Historical sources reference this first and second sleep rhythm frequently. In the 13th century medical text Trotula, there's advice on how to manage digestion and dreams between sleeps. In the Book of the Courtier, a nobleman refers casually to activities undertaken between the first sleep and the second. Even Chaucer, in the Canterbury Tales, alludes to characters waking in the night with purpose, not frustration. But it wasn't just about time, it was about meaning. The waking period was often spiritual. Many people took this quiet hour as a time to pray, especially monks and nuns in monasteries, who followed strict schedules of nightly worship. The night was still and sacred, unhurried by modern noise or light. You could think, breathe, connect with something beyond yourself. And speaking of light, candles and oil lamps were precious commodities, not to be burned frivolously. Most homes had just a few hours of light to spare, so the first sleep took place in deep darkness, and only in the interlude would one carefully light a flame to move around or read scripture. This pattern wasn't just rural or monastic. In cities like Paris and London, the same sleep rhythm prevailed. Whether you were a blacksmith, a baker, or a baron, the human clock still followed the sun. And what about dreams? Oh, they were taken seriously. Very seriously. Medieval folk believed dreams were messages from God, demons, or the dead. People kept dream journals. Dream interpretation books were wildly popular, assigning meanings to every symbol. Dream of losing your teeth? A death in the family. Dream of flying? A spiritual message. Dream of rats? Better check your pantry and your conscience. Medieval people didn't see the mind as off during sleep. Quite the opposite. Sleep was a spiritual voyage, a time when the soul could be visited or tested. Waking in the middle of the night didn't disrupt that. It gave people time to reflect, interpret, even discuss their visions before heading back into the dream world. And let's not forget bed sharing. You didn't have a king-size bed to yourself in the Middle Ages. Entire families often slept together for warmth. In inns and taverns, strangers might share a bed, separated only by a plank, or not at all. It sounds awkward now, but in a world without central heating, sleeping close wasn't weird. It was survival. Beds themselves? Luxuries for the rich. A noble's bed might be ornately carved, covered in furs, raised high off the ground, and surrounded by heavy drapes, both for warmth and privacy. The poor made do with straw pallets or simply slept on benches, cloaks wrapped tight around them. The night was communal, ritualistic, and deeply textured. There were no glowing clocks taunting you with how little sleep you were getting, no guilt about waking up, just a gentle rhythm, sleep, wake, sleep again, that mirrored the natural world. So why did we stop? Why do we now chase the elusive, mythical 8 hours and panic if we stir at 2 a.m.? Blame the next era, the rise of industry, electricity, and time is money. It carved up our nights, flattened our rhythms, and turned sleep from a ritual into a race. But before that, rest was flexible, human, forgiving. And soon, we'll climb into the extravagance of royal beds, where sleep meant power, paranoia, and sometimes sharing your pillow with a corpse. Now you're standing in the velvet-draped corridor of Versailles. Candles flicker along gilded walls. Everything smells faintly of beeswax and powdered wigs. You tiptoe past towering doors into an opulent chamber where an enormous bed, raised high on a platform, sits like a throne. And in it lies Louis XIV, the Sun King himself, surrounded not by silence and sleep, but by an audience. Welcome to royal sleep, where bedtime was a performance and waking up was a political act. Let's start with Louis XIV. He had no fewer than 413 beds across France. But the most important one was at Versailles. His daily rising and nightly sleeping, called the lever and coucher, were public ceremonies. Courtiers lined up just to watch the king put on his nightgown or climb under the sheets. If you were lucky, you might be the one to hand him his candle. Sleeping wasn't just private rest. It was power, protocol, and pageantry. Louis wasn't alone in this. Across royal courts from France to England to Austria, the way kings and queens slept said a lot about their rule. Who was allowed in the bedchamber? Who stood closest to the mattress? These decisions were poisonings, assassinations, and betrayal made sleep risky. Monarchs often kept weapons hidden under pillows, guards outside doors, and decoy rooms to confuse potential attackers. Some even slept in a different bed each night. But perhaps no one took nighttime precaution to the extreme, quite like Queen Elizabeth I. Her bedchamber was practically a fortress. Only a select few could enter. The linens were changed frequently, some say daily, to avoid poison. Her personal sleep habits were tightly guarded secrets, shared with only her closest ladies-in-waiting. Even how she breathed during sleep was watched. Rumors of her death would spiral from a missed candlelight. And then there's Queen Victoria, who changed the rules of sleep in death. After the death of her beloved Prince Albert, she continued to sleep beside his laid-out nightclothes, kept his room exactly as he left it, and even had hot water delivered each morning as if he would wake up. Her grief froze bedtime into a ritual of eternal mourning. Her sleep became a memorial. But not all royal slumber was grim. Take Napoleon, for example. He famously slept only 4 hours a night, claiming sleep was for the weak. He'd nap in carriages, war tents, and between battles. Yet historians suggest these power naps gave him clarity and rapid decision-making abilities. In contrast, his enemies, like the sluggish and sleep-loving King George IV, were often mocked for excessive lounging. Back in the Renaissance, the great thinker Leonardo da Vinci tried an experiment called polyphasic sleep, napping for 15 to 20 minutes every 4 hours, instead of sleeping all at once. This Uberman schedule is said to have given him more waking hours to work. Whether it's myth or fact, the image of a genius artist stealing moments of rest between inventions adds to the legend. Beds themselves became weapons of status. The higher your bed, literally, the more important you were. Royals often needed footstools or steps just to climb into their towering curtain nests. These beds weren't just furniture. They were stages, ceremonial, symbolic, sacred. The king's bed was where heirs were conceived, oaths whispered, and power transferred. And get this, royals rarely slept alone. In many courts, it was common to share beds, even with advisors or other nobles, to foster intimacy, alliance, and trust. This wasn't romantic, it was political. Bed sharing with the monarch could secure loyalty. Sleep became diplomacy. But not everyone in the palace slept well. Servants and chambermaids often slept on thin mats, rolled out in corners, ready to jump to attention if the bell rang. Royal comfort was propped up by an army of sleepless workers, an echo of today's luxury hotels, where someone else's exhaustion buys your rest. Even the architecture of palaces reflected the politics of sleep. Rooms were arranged to reflect closeness to power. The closer your chambers to the monarch, the higher your social rank. In Versailles, courtiers jockeyed for sleeping quarters just to be seen walking the halls at the right moment. So what does all this tell us? That for royals, sleep was not just about health, it was a performance, a statement, a power play. Beds were thrones, bedrooms were theaters, and rest, far from private, was a matter of national interest. Compare that to your own bedtime. You crawl into bed, maybe say goodnight to a pet, set your alarm, and drift off. No servants, no ceremony, no velvet curtains. But you do have your own rituals. Maybe it's brushing your teeth in the same order every night, or doom scrolling until your eyes burn, or setting 3 alarms just in case. Whether you know it or not, you're following a ritual too, a modern, quieter echo of what kings and queens once did under heavy blankets and heavier crowns. But the story of sleep is about to change drastically. Because just around the corner is the Industrial Revolution, when factory whistles replace rooster crows, time is money, and sleep is suddenly a problem. The year is 1850. The streets are thick with soot. The clank of machinery never stops. Somewhere in the haze, a whistle blows sharply at 5 a.m. You jolt awake. Not because your body's ready, but because your shift starts in 20 minutes. Welcome to the Industrial Revolution, where sleep was the first casualty of progress. For thousands of years, humans slept in rhythms dictated by the sun, the moon, and the body's quiet demands. But with the invention of the clock and later the factory, sleep was no longer personal, it was regulated. Sleep became something to control, restrict, and schedule. It stopped being sacred and started being a problem to solve. Let's backtrack. Before electricity, evenings were calm and dim. Candles and gas lamps gave off soft, flickering light that respected your melatonin. But the moment Edison's light bulb hit the scene in the late 1800s, everything changed. Suddenly, darkness could be banished, nights could be extended. Work could continue long after the sun had set, and humans, always hungry for more time, embraced this glow like a gift. But it was a trap. Factories didn't care if you were tired. They needed bodies, awake, alert, and punctual. So workers began waking up before dawn, trudging to work half asleep and returning home exhausted. 12-hour shifts weren't uncommon. Weekends were rare. Rest? That was for the weak. And guess what? This new schedule didn't just kill segmented sleep, it obliterated it. There was no time to wake gently, reflect, or dream between first and second sleeps. Workers were expected to get one long block of rest squeezed in between shifts, chores, and family demands. 8 hours of sleep became the golden standard, not because it was ideal, but because it fit the system. 8 hours for work, 8 for sleep, and 8 for everything else. But the human brain didn't evolve for this, so what happened? Insomnia exploded. Doctors in the 1800s began writing about, quote, sleep disorders like never before. People complained of restlessness, night terrors, exhaustion, all symptoms we now recognize as a body fighting against unnatural sleep schedules. Entire industries popped up to help. Sleep tonics, herbal elixirs, strange devices promising to, quote, shock the brain into drowsiness. It was the dawn of the sleep cure. Then came the alarm clock, perhaps one of the cruelest inventions in history. Before the industrial era, people generally woke with the sun. But with factories demanding early risers, alarm clocks became essential. One early model, marketed in the 1870s, proudly promised it would, quote, shake even the deepest sleeper from slumber. A good night's rest could now be violently interrupted by obligation. At home, sleep arrangements also shifted. As people moved into crowded tenements and urban housing, private bedrooms became a luxury. Families squeezed into 1 or 2 rooms. Sleep was loud, shared, chaotic. Factory whistles, streetcars, shouting vendors, and city dogs made urban nights a symphony of noise. Earplugs weren't a thing. If you slept well, it was either a miracle or sheer exhaustion. Let's talk gender. During this era, sleep became gendered. Men were supposed to rise early, conquer the world, work long hours, and collapse into sleep like machines. Women, on the other hand, were encouraged to rest more, for beauty, calmness, and delicacy. Victorian ladies were sometimes advised to nap in the afternoon to preserve their complexion and avoid hysteria. Sleep in some circles became a marker of femininity, while exhaustion was linked to masculinity and ambition. Meanwhile, children were caught in the middle. As child labor soared, even kids were deprived of sleep, often working 10-hour days in mines or textile mills. School-aged children fell asleep in class, and educators began to notice a troubling decline in attention spans, something we still struggle with today. The rise of sleep etiquette manuals didn't help much. Books like Hints for the Household instructed readers on the, quote, proper way to sleep. Not too long, not too short, never on your stomach, and always in silence. Beds were to be aired every morning. Naps were discouraged unless you were ill. Sleep became a moral issue, something to be disciplined, perfected, and, if necessary, corrected. But not everyone followed the rules. Writers and artists resisted the industrial schedule. Charles Dickens wrote about his chronic insomnia and often walked through London at night, describing the sleeping city with eerie detail. Franz Kafka stayed up writing into the early hours, haunted by dreams. Virginia Woolf described sleep as something like death and often struggled with its boundaries. For creatives, sleep wasn't just rest, it was mystery. Why do some people sleep deeply while others wake at every creak? But society still saw sleep as a problem to solve, not a natural rhythm to respect. Advertising made it worse. Want to be rich, successful, powerful? Sleep less, ads said. Get up earlier, be more productive, hustle harder. Sleep became the enemy of success. Even Thomas Edison, the light bulb guy himself, bragged that he only needed 4 hours a night. He called sleep a criminal waste of time. Irony, he helped destroy sleep and then mocked the very exhaustion he created. So here you are now, a modern descendant of those bleary-eyed factory workers, still trying to fit your sleep into rigid boxes, still feeling guilty for naps, still jolting awake to a digital alarm that demands you go, go, go. You're not lazy. You're out of sync with nature, with history, and with what your body truly needs. But don't worry. In the next era, sleep fights back. Because when the world goes to war, scientists and soldiers begin to realize sleep isn't a weakness, it's a weapon. Imagine, it's 1943. Bombs thunder in the distance. Radios crackle with coded transmissions. A soldier lies in a muddy trench, his helmet pulled over his eyes, stealing 10 minutes of sleep before the next order. Because now, sleep isn't just about recovery, it's a survival tactic. And if you sleep too much, or too little, someone could die. Welcome to the wartime era, when sleep became a battlefield. In both world wars, generals, scientists, and psychologists began to obsess over rest. Why? Because they saw firsthand what sleep deprivation could do. Soldiers who went without sleep for too long became sluggish, confused, and even delusional. They misheard orders, they fired at shadows, they hallucinated enemy movement where there was none. On the front lines, sleep could decide a battle. During World War I, trench warfare meant that soldiers didn't sleep through the night. They slept in rotations, in shifts, with heads resting on rifles, boots still laced. The noise never stopped. The tension never let up. Soldiers began to suffer from what was called shell shock, a condition we now recognize as PTSD, but deeply tangled with chronic, brutal sleep deprivation. By World War II, things became even more extreme. Commanders began studying how little sleep a human could get by on without losing function. They pushed soldiers to the edge, and sometimes beyond. Pilots were drugged with amphetamines to stay awake during missions that lasted 24 hours or more. Ground troops survived on cat naps, often just 5 or 10 minutes grabbed during transport or downtime. In 1942, British Army researchers began running controlled studies on sleep loss and its impact on performance. The results were chilling. Even modest sleep loss, just 2 to 3 hours a night, caused massive drops in reaction time, decision-making, memory, and emotional. But then came the twist. Military planners realized that well-rested soldiers outperformed tired ones by miles. In fact, sleep became a tactical advantage. Commanders began assigning soldiers to designated sleep shifts, making sure that at any given time, someone on the squad was sharp, rested, and able to lead. Sleep moved from a luxury to a logistical requirement. The U.S. Army even began distributing field manuals that included charts about optimal nap times. Soldiers were trained to nap on command, to rest under pressure, even to microsleep during long periods of stillness. The war forced humans to rediscover what ancient tribes had always known. Sleep is a tool. At the same time, scientists back home were asking bigger questions. What is sleep, really? Why do we dream? Can we optimize it? This era gave rise to the first true sleep labs. One of the most famous belonged to Nathaniel Kleitman, often called the father of modern sleep science. Working from the University of Chicago in the 1930s and 40s, Kleitman and his students, including Eugene Oserinsky, discovered something groundbreaking: REM sleep. They noticed that during certain parts of the night, the eyes darted rapidly under closed lids. The brain lit up with activity, and dreams became vivid. These REM periods came in cycles, and they were essential for cognitive health, emotional regulation, and memory consolidation. It was a revelation. Sleep wasn't passive. It was active, structured, and necessary. Dreams, once thought of as mystical or meaningless, now had a biological purpose. And missing REM sleep didn't just make you tired. It made you emotionally unstable. This was huge, especially in wartime, when millions were being pushed to their physical and mental limits. Meanwhile, civilians also felt the pressure. During the Blitz in London, families slept in subways, curled together on station platforms as bombs fell above. Sleep had to happen, somehow, between sirens. It wasn't restful, but it was shared, and that made a difference. Back in the US, wartime factories ran on 24-hour shifts. Workers slept in rotating schedules. Night shifts became common. And the lack of sleep began to show. Accidents rose. Mistakes mounted. Sleep became a national concern, not just for soldiers, but for civilians too. In response, public health campaigns started promoting better rest. Posters encouraged workers to get your 8 and warned about the dangers of fatigue. Even comic books showed superheroes reminding readers to nap and avoid exhaustion. But there was one group who didn't get the memo: leaders. Famous wartime figures had wildly different approaches to sleep. Winston Churchill famously took daily naps, long, luxurious ones, often with a cigar and a glass of whiskey on his bedside table. He believed napping was his secret weapon. Franklin D. Roosevelt, despite being paralyzed from the waist down, often worked into the night and rose late, compensating with periods of quiet rest throughout the day. Hitler, on the other hand, suffered from chronic insomnia, kept bizarre hours, and often slept during the day, leading to poor timing and late responses that historians argue contributed to major strategic errors. Sleep, in other words, tilted history. By the end of the war, one thing was clear: you couldn't win without sleep. It was no longer seen as weakness, but as essential performance fuel. Whether flying a plane, coding encrypted messages, or planning D-Day, those who slept smart made better decisions. And when the war ended, those sleep studies didn't stop. In fact, they exploded. Researchers began diving deeper into brainwaves, circadian rhythms, and disorders. Sleep clinics spread, and suddenly, the average person started asking the same question military generals had once asked under fire: what does it take to truly rest well? But we weren't done yet. Because while science finally respected sleep, the modern world had other plans. Lights, deadlines, phones, screens. The post-war boom brought luxury, and with it, came the death of darkness. It's 1965. You lie in bed, the room around you glowing faintly blue. Not from moonlight, but from the brand new television set humming in the corner. Outside, the city never sleeps. Neon lights buzz. Cars rush by. Somewhere in a high-rise office, someone's just brewed a fresh pot of coffee to burn through another all-nighter. Welcome to the post-war boom, when the world got richer, faster, louder, and sleep paid the price. By now, science had confirmed that sleep wasn't laziness. It was biological gold. REM cycles, circadian rhythms, hormonal rebalancing, memory storage, dream therapy, but even as researchers unlocked its secrets, society chose to ignore them. Why? Because for the first time in history, humans could live 24/7. With electricity lighting homes, streets, and offices, the natural cues that once told your body to wind down, sunset, stillness, candlelight, were completely overridden. Supermarkets stayed open all night. Radio gave way to television, and then came 24-hour news. You could now be entertained, informed, and connected every single second. And one of the biggest disruptors? Technology. In 1946, only 8,000 American households owned a television. By 1960, it was 45 million. People went from winding down with books or conversation to falling asleep to sitcom laugh tracks or late-night broadcasts. Bedroom routines shifted. Sleep, once respected as a sacred daily ritual, became an inconvenience between shows, shifts, or phone calls. And then came the sleeping pill boom. With modern society now obsessed with productivity and image, being tired became unacceptable. The solution? Pharmacology. In the 1950s and 60s, barbiturates and tranquilizers like Seconal, Nembutal, and later Valium were marketed as glamorous tools to chase, quote, beauty sleep, unquote. These drugs were often prescribed liberally, especially to women, marketed under labels like Mother's Little Helper. Magazines ran ads promising the perfect night's rest in one tiny pill. But there was a catch. These medications weren't designed for long-term use. Dependency skyrocketed. Some people couldn't fall asleep without them. Others overslept or entered dangerous cycles of sedation and withdrawal. We had medicalized a basic human function because we were losing touch with how to just sleep. Meanwhile, in the workplace, hustle culture was taking root. CEOs bragged about 4-hour nights. Workers pulled double shifts. The coffee break became a survival ritual. Burnout was still a whisper word, but it was creeping into boardrooms, hospitals, and homes. In the 1980s, a new villain emerged, the personal computer. Now people could work longer, from home, late into the night. The line between on and off blurred. Screens became a second sun. And if you thought the glow of TV was bad, computers were worse. They emitted blue light, a specific wavelength known to disrupt melatonin, the hormone that helps you fall asleep. And then, in the early 2000s, everything changed again. You got smartphones, tablets, laptops, screens in your hand, your bed, your pocket. You could text, game, shop, scroll, binge, all under the covers, long after your body had begged for sleep. Notifications pinged your brain like little digital jolts. Your bedroom, once a place for stillness, had become a battlefield of dopamine. And the price? You guessed it. Sleep quality tanked. Studies from the early 2000s showed that people were getting less sleep than ever before, and what sleep they did get was lighter, more fragmented, and less restorative. Teens were particularly vulnerable, staying up late with screens and rising early for school. Sleep experts began issuing dire warnings. Lack of sleep was now tied to obesity, heart disease, depression, and even shortened lifespan. But here's the kicker. People didn't seem to care. Modern culture had turned sleep deprivation into a badge of honor. You weren't successful unless you were grinding. You weren't committed unless you were pulling all-nighters. Wall Street brokers bragged about sleeping under their desks. The phrase, "I'll sleep when I'm dead," became a lifestyle slogan. And yet, something stirred. By the 2010s, the tide began to turn. Celebrities like Ariana Huffington published books on the power of sleep. Silicon Valley engineers, once proud insomniacs, began optimizing their sleep with gadgets, apps, and strict bedtime routines. People bought weighted blankets, blackout curtains, white noise machines. Meditation apps promised to lull you into REM. Suddenly, sleep became cool. Sleep was no longer the enemy. It was the secret weapon. Corporate wellness programs added nap pods. Elite athletes bragged about sleeping 10 hours a night. Tech companies pushed blue light filters. Sleep tracking became a booming industry. You could now measure your sleep in graphs, scores, and biometric data. Finally, society was waking up to the fact that rest is not optional. And yet, despite the gadgets, guides, and gurus, the average person still struggles. Why? Because the world is now designed to keep you awake. Social media apps are engineered to addict. News cycles never stop. Emails buzz at midnight. Your bedroom doubles as your office. Your eyes glow long after the sun sets. We're smarter than ever about sleep, but still starving for it. Knowledge hasn't yet become habit. Science hasn't yet rebuilt our schedules. And we're all paying for it, in fatigue, anxiety, burnout, and silence behind our eyes. But here's the hopeful part. You can change. And in the next chapter, the world is finally trying. Because sleep is having a renaissance, a comeback that blends ancient wisdom, modern science, and a new respect for what it means to truly rest. You're here now, in the present, 2025, give or take. And the war on sleep is still raging. But for the first time in centuries, people are fighting back, not with stimulants or shortcuts, but with something radical: respect for rest. The boring history of sleep has come full circle, and suddenly, sleep is sacred again. We're living in a time where sleep science is booming. Once considered a soft field, it's now one of the fastest-growing areas in medicine and psychology. Universities run massive sleep labs. Neurologists study REM cycles with MRI machines. Apps and wearables collect trillions of data points on how long people sleep, how well they breathe, how often they toss, snore, or drift into dreamland. You can now see your sleep score on your phone, like a grade for your night. You can track heart rate, blood oxygen, sleep stages, and even how much you moved. It's data-driven slumber. And while some find comfort in the numbers, others feel even more pressure. Why am I only scoring a 72? As if sleep could be gamified like a fitness goal. Still, these tools help. For the first time in modern history, people are talking openly about sleep hygiene, setting a and waking up with sunlight instead of alarms. We're rebuilding what the Industrial Revolution broke: natural rhythms. And we're also turning to the past for answers. Ancient wisdom about circadian cycles, natural light exposure, and segmented sleep is making a comeback. People are experimenting with biphasic sleep again, especially during naps. Meditation and breathing practices from Eastern traditions are being integrated into Western bedtime routines. Instead of just fighting insomnia with pills, people are learning to work with their biology, not against it. Companies, once proud to grind employees to dust, are now building nap pods, sleep lounges, and flexible schedules. Big names like Google, Nike, and NASA recognize that well-rested workers are faster, sharper, more creative, and safer. Sleep is now seen as an investment, not a delay. Even schools are changing. After years of resistance, some districts are finally moving high school start times later, acknowledging that teenagers have delayed sleep cycles. The old 7 a.m. bell schedule didn't just make kids grumpy, it damaged mental health, academic performance, and development. Now science is being heard. And don't forget athletes. Elite sports teams hire sleep coaches. LeBron James sleeps 10 to 12 hours a night during training. Tennis champion Roger Federer once said he needed 11 hours to play at his best. Sleep is no longer a weakness. It's part of the strategy. But here's the real twist. Sleep is becoming emotional again. We've stopped seeing it as a mechanical shutdown and started seeing it as healing. More and more, sleep is being prescribed not just for energy, but for trauma recovery, anxiety, and grief. Doctors now recognize that emotional resilience, memory processing, and even creativity are deeply tied to quality sleep. It's not just about getting through the day, it's about building yourself back up. And dreams? They're no longer ignored. Some therapists work with dream journals. Neuroscientists map lucid dreams, where the dreamer becomes aware they're dreaming. Artists, inventors, and writers increasingly credit dreams for breakthroughs. Paul McCartney dreamed the melody for Yesterday. A chemist dreamed the structure of benzene. Dreaming is no longer superstition. It's cognitive theater. Of course, we still face massive challenges. The modern world is flooded with noise, light, and distraction. Smartphones still glow at midnight. Streaming never stops. Sleep disorders, from insomnia to apnea, are on the rise. Millions still struggle. And the pressure to optimize everything, even rest, can become its own kind of stress. But we've come far. From ancient Egyptian dreams and Roman nap culture to medieval segmented sleep and royal bedtime rituals, through industrial grind and wartime exhaustion to modern science and mindfulness, sleep has evolved. And
waking up with sunlight instead of alarms. We're rebuilding what the Industrial Revolution broke, natural rhythms. And we're also turning to the past for answers. Ancient wisdom about circadian cycles, natural light exposure, and segmented sleep is making a comeback. People are experimenting with biphasic sleep again, especially during naps. Meditation and breathing practices from Eastern traditions are being integrated into Western bedtime routines. Instead of just fighting insomnia with pills, people are learning to work with their biology, not against it. Companies, once proud to grind employees to dust, are now building nap pods, sleep lounges, and flexible schedules. Big names like Google, Nike, and NASA recognize that well-rested workers are faster, sharper, more creative, and safer. Sleep is now seen as an investment, not a delay. Even schools are changing. After years of resistance, some districts are finally moving high school start times later, acknowledging that teenagers have delayed sleep cycles. The old 7 a.m. bell schedule didn't just make kids grumpy, it damaged mental health, academic performance, and development. Now science is being heard. And don't forget athletes. Elite sports teams hire sleep coaches. LeBron James sleeps 10 to 12 hours a night during training. Tennis champion Roger Federer once said he needed 11 hours to play at his best. Sleep is no longer a weakness. It's part of the strategy. But here's the real twist. Sleep is becoming emotional again. We've stopped seeing it as a mechanical shutdown and started seeing it as healing. More and more, sleep is being prescribed not just for energy, but for trauma recovery, anxiety, and grief. Doctors now recognize that emotional resilience, memory processing, and even creativity are deeply tied to quality sleep. It's not just about getting through the day, it's about building yourself back up. And dreams? They're no longer ignored. Some therapists work with dream journals. Neuroscientists map lucid dreams, where the dreamer becomes aware they're dreaming. Artists, inventors, and writers increasingly credit dreams for breakthroughs. Paul McCartney dreamed the melody for Yesterday. A chemist dreamed the structure of benzene. Dreaming is no longer superstition. It's cognitive theater. Of course, we still face massive challenges. The modern world is flooded with noise, light, and distraction. Smartphones still glow at midnight. Streaming never stops. Sleep disorders, from insomnia to apnea, are on the rise. Millions still struggle. And the pressure to optimize everything, even rest, can become its own kind of stress. But we've come far. From ancient Egyptian dreams and Roman nap culture to medieval segmented sleep and royal bedtime rituals. Through industrial grind and wartime exhaustion to modern science and mindfulness, sleep has evolved. And tonight, when you finally lie back and close your eyes, you're not just doing what you need to survive. You're stepping into a tradition older than civilization, a nightly ritual that connects you with pharaohs, monks, peasants, kings, and astronauts alike. Because no matter what age you live in, or what screen blinks at you from the corner, your body still knows. Sleep is where you heal. Sleep is where you remember. Sleep is where you dream. So go ahead, curl up, let go. Drift backward and downward into the one thing every human, rich, poor, old, young, has in common. And don't worry, tomorrow will still be waiting when you wake. Sweet dreams.